Chapter 147, 7th Year, After Dark. Friday the 28th of April, 1978. Remus! Remus! Oh, fuck's sake, wake up! Piss off, Remus muttered, still half asleep as he rolled over. It's the middle of the night. You're grinding your teeth again, Sirius whispered, frowning. Can't help it. Go to sleep. Between your gnashing and Prongs' snoring and Wormtail getting up every 5 minutes, how can I? Oi! Peter's indignant voice came from the opposite end of the room. I have a nervous bladder. You shouldn't drink so much water before you go to bed. Sirius hissed. Sorry, Mother, Peter grumbled. Didn't realise you were monitoring my biology. You trip over dirty laundry every time you get up. Actually, it was Mooney's books. Not mine, Remus protested. For the prank. All of you, shut up, James snapped. For a moment there was silence. Bloody Wormtail, Sirius grumbled, rolling over and shoving his face into the pillow. Great, now I need the loo. Remus sighed, shoving the blankets back and crawling out of bed. Everyone had been on edge lately. For good reason. Newt started next week, and there wasn't a single 7th year who wasn't feeling the strain of endless revision. Even Sirius had found himself roped into a few study sessions, not wanting to let Remus and James one-up him when it came to their final marks. Sirius shut his eyes and tried to fall back to sleep, listening to the quiet sound of water rushing in the bathroom and the bathroom door opening and shutting. The moment Remus was out, Peter dashed over to the little bathroom, footsteps scurrying across the floor. Suddenly an explosion of light burst through the room. In fumbling for the light switch to the bathroom, Peter had accidentally turned on the overheads. Sirius squeezed his eyes shut, startled out of the sleep that he had just begun to drift into. Wormtail, you prick! He shouted, grabbing a pillow and pressing it over his face. Sorry, Peter yelped, fumbling with the light switches again. I didn't mean to get that one. Can't wait till I don't have to share a room with you any more, you little rodent, Sirius hissed, glaring through the brightness. Don't you ever think about anyone else? Oh, shut up, dickhead, Peter shot back, voice slightly wobbly. Think I like sharing a room with you and Mooney? Sirius bristled, narrowing his eyes. What about me and Mooney? Just go to the loo, Peter, Remus interjected, reaching over to turn on the bathroom lights and flip the switch off for the overheads, allowing blissful darkness to fall over the room once more. Peter stomped into the bathroom and slammed the door, locking it behind him. Silly little sod, Sirius muttered, glaring as his eyes readjusted to the dark. Sirius? Remus frowned, using the commanding voice that he had perfected, the one that left no room for protest. Stop whining. Sirius fell silent immediately, sitting a bit straighter. One command in that voice was usually followed by others. Be quiet. Lie back. Shirt off. Remus smirked as if he knew exactly what Sirius was thinking. Good boy. He did not return to bed, instead glancing at the clock and muttering, I'm going downstairs. I won't be able to go back to sleep now. He turned back, and the smirk became mildly sadistic. And you can have some peace. Tease, Sirius nearly said, but didn't. It was true that he'd been complaining more than usual about sharing a bed. He'd accidentally vanished his own earlier that week while they were trying to practice for the prank, and even though he preferred sleeping together anyway, it was nice to have the option to move when Remus started incessantly grinding his teeth in his sleep. Still, just because he'd been whining didn't actually mean he wanted Mooney to leave, especially not after he'd purposely gotten Sirius worked up. The bastard. He frowned as Remus grabbed a book and left, watching the door shut quietly behind him. For a moment there was nothing but darkness and silence, save for the crack of light from under the bathroom door, and the sound of water rushing as Peter washed his hands. Then James's voice, sleepy and amused, came from behind his bed curtains. "Good boy." Sirius's face grew hot. "Shut up, Prongs." "Merlin, you really are like a dog." "I mean it, Potter. Don't make me smother you with your own pillow." "Oh, but then you wouldn't be a very good boy, would you?" There was a thump as one of Sirius's pillows smacked against the curtains on James's bed, followed by muffled laughter. But then Peter exited the bathroom, and they both let the subject drop, and within a few minutes James was back to his usual thunderous snoring. Sirius sighed, shutting his eyes and trying to go back to sleep, but it was no use. Peter had started snoring too. It was almost like he and Prongs were singing a duet. Sirius crawled out of bed, wrapping the blankets around his shoulders like a cape, and making his way down to the common room. Remus was pouring tea when he walked in, already levitating a second cup over from the cabinet. As Sirius moved closer to the couch, he said, without turning around, "Thought you wanted to sleep." "Prong's still snoring," Sirius mumbled around a yawn, wrapping himself even more tightly in the blanket as a cool breeze whispered through an open window. "Bloody hell, it's freezing down here." I'll shut the window. "No, it's okay. I'll warm up." He accepted the mug of tea that Remus passed him, leaning against the taller boy's shoulder as he sat down. Remus murmured a spell under his breath to levitate his book in the air, wrapping one arm around Sirius and holding his own cup of tea in the other hand. "What are you reading?" Sirius asked, blinking sleepily down at the thick text. "Oh, something I found on legitimacy." Sirius stiffened. "Eh?" He frowned at Remus. "Why?" "Just interested." The other boy shrugged. "Wanted to read something outside of my Newt's core texts, and I thought, mind reading, cool, you wouldn't want to." "I think it ought to be illegal," Sirius said coldly. "It's an invasion of privacy, practically a dark art." Remus gave him a wary look. "Well, I'm only reading about it." Sirius blinked, realizing how tense he'd become. He lay his head back on Remus's shoulder, muttering, "Didn't mean you would." After a moment, Remus released the levitation spell, setting the book down on the coffee table in front of the sofa. He lifted a hand to stroke Sirius's hair, running his fingers gently through the strands, brushing against his scalp with just the right amount of pressure. Sirius sighed, relaxing. "Sorry," he said quietly after a bit. "Didn't mean to snap." He hesitated, swallowed, then said, "It's just that my mother can do it. She's a legitimate." "Oh. So she can find out what we're up to, where our loyalties lie." "I'm sorry, Padfoot." Remus squeezed him a bit tighter, and Sirius felt warm and safe, even as the dark memories surfaced from the murk in the back of his mind. "Don't be. I'm well shot of her, mad old bat." And I'd sort of learnt how to deflect it by the end. Made her so angry. He tried to laugh. It worked. Sort of. "You learned occlumency?" Remus asked, sounding impressed. "That's incredible." "Not exactly." Sirius trailed off, searching for the words to explain. Remus waited patiently, and after a moment Sirius sat up, placing his tea carefully on the table. "It's more like you just learn how not to think of the things she wants you to think. It got worse when we were teenagers. You know, she was worried about impure thoughts. Toujours pure. So I'd just distract her by thinking something else." "So she didn't find out about Mary?" Remus asked softly, "or the other Muggle-born girls?" Sirius swallowed. "You are tainted. Tainted, just as he was." "Yeah, that, and I can still save you." "Well, whatever. Anything I didn't want her to know. Trouble is, you end up confusing yourself. It's like tying your own thoughts up in knots. Hard to unpick. Afraid I used to get the raw end of that a bit." He looked up carefully into Mooney's eyes, There was pity there, but there was something else too. Something fierce, something protective, something sweet. An understanding which Sirius hadn't realised he'd been seeking. Remus hugged him tightly, both cups of tea abandoned on the table. Sirius pressed his face into the crook between his shoulder and his neck, blinking back tears that stung his eyes. "Sirius," Remus began, when they finally broke apart. It's fine, Mooney," Sirius assured him quickly. "It's all over now." "I know, but I want you to know. I want you to tell you, I really, I know," Sirius breathed, leaning forward to kiss him. "Me too." Friday the 5th of May, 1978. "I'm hungry," Sirius groaned, lying with his head hanging upside down off the end of the bed. "Take the cloak and go down to the kitchens, then," Remus said absent-mindedly, only half listening from where he was sitting propped against the pillows with a book. "But that's so far." "Don't take the cloak to the kitchens, then." "Ugh, you're no help." "Wormy, got any food?" Sirius looked up, hopefully, as Peter exited the bathroom, yawning. "No." The shorter boy frowned, sullen. "You ate my last cauldron cake last night." "Ugh. Prongs?" "Sorry, mate. You can take the cloak if you want, though." "Will you come with me?" "Can't. Gotta be up early for tomorrow. Extra practice with Ericsson." Sirius groaned again dramatically. "Utterly heartless, the lot of you. Do you really want me to starve to death here, in our beloved dormitory?" "Oh, sod off, Pads. It's your own fault you're not eating enough at dinner." "I was busy." "You were trying to build a tower of goblets." "Exactly." James tutted, exasperated, and from somewhere near Sirius's feet Remus snorted, shaking his head and turning a page in his book. Sirius pouted. "Please." The balled-up invisibility cloak hit him in the face. 20 minutes later, Sirius reached the final landing before the staircase up to Gryffindor Tower, arms full of sweets. Overly accommodating, as usual. He just hoped that his friends were hungry too. Sirius was about to round the turn to the spiralling staircase when he heard something. He hesitated, listening. Sure enough, there was the soft shuffling sound, and then sniffling. Someone crying again. He peeked around the bend, safely hidden under the invisibility cloak, and was shocked to see Mary. She sat curled up in the little alcove next to the window, knees drawn up to her chest. Her face was red and splotchy, free of the makeup she usually wore, and she was clad in only pyjamas. Sirius didn't think he'd ever seen her without her jewellery before. Sirius watched. Mary sniffled again, rubbing her tears on her cheeks. He felt guilty for spying. Clearly he was intruding on something private, but now that he'd seen her, it didn't feel right for him to just continue on to the common room. He ducked back around the bend, hastily whispering the levitation spell for the snacks in his arms before whipping off the cloak and shoving it under his robes. Once he was hidden, he scooped the sweets up again and continued up the stairs. "Mary?" he said cautiously as he approached the little alcove. She jumped, head whipping around. "Oh, perfect," she muttered, with a small, bitter laugh that sounded completely unfamiliar coming from her lips. "It's you." Are you alright?" Mary snorted. "I dunno, Sirius. Do I look bloody alright to you?" She scrunched up her face again, snapping. "What are you even doing out here? It's past curfew." "Snuck down to the kitchens?" he said, holding up his armfuls of sweets as proof. Mary's brow furrowed. "How'd you get past... Oh, never mind. I don't care. Just run along, Sirius. I don't have time for you tonight." "Did something happen?" Mary shook her head, looking away. "Did something happen?" she muttered, half to herself. "Christ! It's like none of you people ever see what's really going on around here." "You can tell me," Sirius said gently, reaching out to place a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right." I shouldn't have to tell you. Mary shook him off, glaring. Jesus! Nobody in this castle ever treats me like a fucking person. It's like I'm just a thing for all of you to dump your shit on, and I'm supposed to take it and make you feel better about it, and... Mary, what? Oh, please, Sirius, don't act like you don't know what I'm fucking talking about. Sirius stared at her, utterly shocked. Where is this coming from? She laughed, slightly hysterical. Where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? Fuck, I don't know. Maybe it's coming from the 6 months that you made me feel like shit when I was 15 because you were trying to figure yourself out. From the way that fucking Emmeline fucking Vance can sleep with Roman Rothhide as much as she fucking wants, and nobody will ever call her a slag for it. But the second I go out with him, every boy in this stupid bloody school can't wait to tell me that I'm easy. And God forbid I complain about it to my best fucking friend, 'cause, oh, Jesus, she has it so much worse. It's so hard to be another fucking half-blood white woman in this castle. And if I don't want everyone calling me a slut, then I should just stop acting like one, shouldn't I? What? Marlene called you a... Sirius broke off, hesitant to repeat the word. Mary threw her hands up. She bloody may as well have. It's what she was getting at. Sirius stared, completely at a loss of what to do. He didn't think he'd ever seen Mary cry before. She was always so cheerful, so bright. He'd seen her angry, of course, but even then she was radiant, passionate and unwaveringly confident. He would never have expected her to break down like this, stifling sobs as she shouted at him. That's really shitty of her, Mary. I'm sorry. Oh, spare me, Black. It's not like you're any better. What? Have I said something to upset you? He racked his brain, trying to think of anything out of the ordinary from the past few days, but as far as he was aware, things had been entirely normal. They'd all mostly just been revising for newts. Mary laughed again, the same bitter sound. Her shoulders slumped. The fire dimmed in her eyes, and she began to look more exhausted than angry. Yes, she croaked, sniffling. No, I don't know. It's more than that. It's not just you. Sirius watched anxiously as she sucked in a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was a bit steadier. Some days, it's like this entire fucking castle is determined to make me hate myself. If it's not one thing, then it's another. My blood, my skin, my fucking hair. Do you know McGonagall suggested I try and make it look more professional for ministry interviews? She snorted. As if I'd ever want to work in the bloody ministry in the first place. Sirius remained silent, and Mary sighed, tilting her head back against the stone wall. I just really can't wait to leave this whole bloody school behind. For a moment they were both quiet. Sirius mumbled, I'm sorry, Mary. Wishing he knew what else to say, she shook her head. Yeah, well, doesn't really change anything, does it? He swallowed, looking down. No, I suppose not. After a moment, he glanced up again, asking, Is there something that brought all of this on? I mean, I didn't realise that you felt like shit. He shrugged sheepishly. Yeah, that. Mary sighed again, deeply, turning to look out the window. I don't know, she muttered. Suppose it's just everything. I had a conversation with Remus earlier about the war, and then McGonagall's stupid comment, and then I saw Roman, and he said some stuff. And then I tried to talk to Marlene about it, and, well, here I am. She laughed weakly. Sorry for yelling at you. Sirius shook his head. You don't need to apologise. Yeah, you're right. I'm not sorry. He smiled tentatively, and after a moment she smiled back. He stepped forward, shuffling around the sweets in his arms. that stuff in 6th year, I never meant to make you feel bad about yourself. I wouldn't ever want to make you feel that way. I know. Mary wrapped her arms a bit more tightly around her knees. Still did, though. She looked very tired, oddly vulnerable without her usual lipstick and mascara. Sirius frowned, guilt twisting in his chest. I'll try to do better, in the future. And if I'm ever acting like a brat, you have my full permission to yell at me. This earned a weak laugh. Noted, Black. I'll keep that in mind. He continued to hover, feeling simultaneously like there was nothing else he could do, and that he should be doing more. After a minute of silence, he finally held out his arms. Fancy a cauldron cake? Mary turned to stare up at him. After a moment, a tired smile crept across her face. A cauldron cake sounds good. Chapter 148. 7th year, the final. Sirius Black would never be a fan of Christopher. Even when he wasn't asking Remus to Hogsmeade every weekend, the little prat was just so boring, and he always had this pretentious sort of frown on his face, like he thought he was better than everyone. Plus, even after that kiss in the corridor, Sirius still sometimes caught the boy casting longing looks after Remus. But as the wind whipped through his hair, and the crowd screamed and booed and cheered, and James caught his eye, grinning, Sirius could have kissed Christopher, right there in the middle of the field. He might not like the boy, but he had to give credit where credit was due, and Sirius knew as he looked up at the stands that he would forever be grateful to the mousy little prefect. It had all started 4 days ago, though of course none of them could have ever predicted how things would end up. The Marauders had spent their entire evening in the library, studying for the last exam they would ever take at Hogwarts, arithmancy. At least, James, Sirius and Remus were studying. Peter was providing snacks. The house elves downstairs simply adored him. "It's 11:30, Sirius said, around a yawn. "Come on, I don't think my brain can absorb any more knowledge tonight." "I don't think your brain ever absorbed any—" "Ow!" Sirius interrupted James's teasing with a sharp kick under the table, and the other boy winced, rubbing his leg ruefully. "Come on," Sirius tried again. "It'll be curfew soon, anyway." "Well, with the head boy, I don't think curfew really matters," Remus muttered, without even glancing up from his frantic note-taking. Fortunately, James was on Sirius's side. He yawned as he took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes and leaning back in his chair. "Nah, Padfoot's right. We've been here for hours. Let's call it quits and have a refresher session tomorrow, yeah?" Peter glanced back and forth between Remus and the others, clearly just as eager to leave. Remus dipped his quill back in the pot of ink. "You lot go, if you want, but I'll kick myself if I waste any time on this. It's our last exam." "You're hardly wasting time," Sirius tutted. "You've been in the library so much this term, they're considering putting a plaque up in your honour." "It's necessary," Remus insisted. "I want to beat Snape." "And you will," Sirius assured him. "Come on, you ain't black circles under your eyes." "Oh no," Remus groaned sarcastically, finally setting down his quill. "My roguish good looks. Ruined." "Shut up, you handsome prick," Sirius said with a playful nudge. Remus finally accosted, and the four of them picked up all their books and papers before heading towards the exit. Most of the desks in the library were still occupied by harried students, muttering anxiously to themselves or their friends as they tried to cram some last-minute revision. "I can't wait for it all to be over," Peter sighed wistfully. "Imagine! No more homework! Forever!" Remus turned to him with such a distressed look on his face that Sirius couldn't help but laugh, slinging an arm around the poor swat's shoulder. "You'll still have deadlines," James reminded Pete, stifling another yawn as they walked through the quiet corridors. "If you want to do ministry work, Dad complains about them all the time." "Doubt I'll ever be as important as your dad," Peter muttered, looking down at his feet. How are the applications going, anyway? James asked, ignoring the bitter undertones to the remark. Oh, all right. Mum says my stepdad might be able to put in a good word, in case I don't hear back from anywhere. It won't be because of you, Wormy, James assured him. They're making cuts everywhere, mate, because of the war. Things are hard all over. Not for Quidditch players, Peter muttered resentfully, scuffing his shoe along the floor. Sirius frowned at the sour tone, but said nothing, letting James respond for himself. I'm not going to be a Quidditch player. Not until the war is over. James had been very clear about that, so Sirius didn't understand why Peter still insisted on acting so sullen whenever the topic of jobs was brought up. They all knew that James would be sacrificing more than any of them by joining the war. He probably would have 10 different contracts to choose from if he wanted to go pro. Yet he was dedicating himself instead to make the world a safer place. It was bloody noble of him, and it really bothered Sirius when Pete gave him a hard time about it. He was still debating whether or not to say something snarky, when Remus suddenly stopped, staring straight ahead and frowning. The rest of the marauders paused too, looking at him. What's wrong? Sirius asked. Forget something? Remus shook his head, brow furrowed. After a moment he whispered, There's someone around the corner. Filch, James whispered back. Remus shook his head again. I think it's... He trailed off, striding ahead without warning and peering around the corner. Chris. The rest of them heard the younger boy's voice, slightly dopey and slow. Oh, hello. Remus? When Sirius hurried over to Moony's side, Christopher was just standing, aimlessly, leaning against the wall and blinking in a dazed sort of way. Remus frowned, concerned. You right? Oh, yes, Chris nodded. Very well, thanks. Very good. Very fine indeed. Is he stoned? Sirius couldn't stop the amused grin that spread across his face. It would have been too funny. Stuck up, priggish Christopher, so high that he could barely string a proper sentence together. But Remus didn't seem amused. He was still concerned, reaching out to touch the younger boy's arm gently, as he murmured, I don't think so. I don't think so. Christopher, what are you doing? It's almost curfew. You on patrol? Patrol? Christopher blinked dumbly, then a dopey smile spread across his face. Yes, that must be it. He's confounded, James said, standing at Remus's other shoulder. Christopher, has anyone cast a spell on you tonight? Or near you, and it backfired? Maybe he did it to himself, Peter murmured. I did that once, remember? No, Chris wouldn't try to confound someone. Remus's frown deepened. Chris, who was the last person you saw? Was it you? No, Remus said patiently, putting his hands on the smaller boy's shoulders and looking him dead in the eye. No, not me. Concentrate. Before I got here, what were you doing? I was patrolling. No. I mean... Oh, come on, let's get back to the tower, yeah? Remus sighed, keeping one hand on Christopher's shoulder so that he could steer him as they began to move down the corridor, glancing back at his friends with a concerned look on his face. Should we tell someone? Sirius asked, turning to James. Or, I don't know, take him to Madame Pomfrey. I'm not ill, Christopher informed them helpfully. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. We'll ask Lily. She'll know what to do. I don't know what to do, said Lily, once they were all gathered in the common room. She tried asking Christopher a series of questions, but he hadn't been able to respond properly to any of them. Still, he seemed all right, smiling up happily from where he was sat in an armchair, with that same blank look in his eyes. Finally, Lily gave up, frowning at him. I mean, he looks okay, and he doesn't seem upset. Christopher, did you get into a fight with someone? An argument? I don't think so, Christopher replied, yawning. I think I'll go to bed, if it's all right with you lot. The rest of them exchanged helpless glances before Lily turned to James. Take him up, will you? Just make sure he doesn't get lost on the way. James nodded, springing into action immediately. He clapped a hand on Christopher's shoulder. Come on then, mate. Let's get you to your dorm. They watched the two boys disappear up the stairs. Weird, Lily sighed. No one else was around? Not that I saw, Remus told her. But God knows how long he was standing there. Well, he was on the rota for patrol this evening, she mused, rummaging in her bag for the organiser, where she kept track of prefect patrol schedules. I always tell the prefects to go round in pairs, though, so he shouldn't have been alone. He's usually so reliable. I'll talk to him in the morning. Maybe he'll be a bit sharper then. Doesn't look like he came to any harm, Peter said, unconcerned. Maybe he was drunk, or stoned, or whatever. He's trying to cover his tracks. Remus frowned at this suggestion, clearly disagreeing. Sirius had to admit, as funny as he found the idea of stoned Christopher, he didn't think it was very likely either. The boy was such a goody two-shoes, he probably wouldn't even touch a cigarette. And besides, James knew his stuff when it came to magical attacks. He was the best in their year at defence against the dark arts. If he thought Chris had been confounded, then that was probably it. When James finally made his way back to the common room, he reported that Christopher was safely in bed and seemed all right, all things considered. They all settled down in front of the fireplace and let the subject drop. It wasn't exactly the strangest thing ever to happen at Hogwarts. It wasn't long before their conversation turned to the upcoming Quidditch match, Gryffindor versus Slytherin. They would be playing in just a handful of days, and both James and Sirius had hardly been able to think about anything else. Now that everything had calmed down with Marlene, practices were much less awkward, which was good, because every second not spent revising for Newts was spent on the pitch. When they weren't out practicing drills or flying laps, they were talking strategy. Peter was almost more enthusiastic about any of them. He had an entire notebook full of information about every player on each side. Remus, on the other hand, could hardly be bothered to pay attention. As the others nattered on about Slytherin's new beta, he pulled out his arithmancy book and began to try and revise, but within minutes he had dozed off in his cosy armchair. Half an hour later, the others were stretching and standing to head up to bed. Sirius shook him awake. Moony, come on, bedtime. Remus blinked the sleep from his eyes, looking down at his open textbook in dismay once he realised he'd fallen asleep. Bollocks, he grumbled, stretching. Sirius laughed. Told you that was enough for one day. Remus's only response was a huge yawn as he stood up. He trailed after Sirius and Peter as they made their way over to the stairs, leaving James and Lily to perform their usual good-night routine, which involved quite a lot of tongue, yet very little speaking. Sirius was shaken awake at 5 the next morning by James, and he groaned quietly as he stretched, trying not to wake Remus. Moony was finally sleeping well again, no more tossing and turning, and for a moment Sirius just stared down at his peaceful face, lips slightly parted with each breath. Sirius moved slowly, doing his best not to jostle the sleeping boy as he began to crawl out of bed. But it was no use. Remus twitched and murmured, shifting under the blanket. Stay. His hand skimmed lightly along the skin of Remus's upper arm, making him shiver. Sorry, Moony. He moved the tired boy's hands away gently, placing them back on the bed. Big game in 2 days. Got to practice. What time is it? Just gone 5. Ugh, Remus groaned, putting the blankets back over his head. You're all mental. Yep, Sirius grinned at the lump under the covers. Go back to sleep. I'll see you later. James was tapping his foot impatiently by the time Sirius emerged, using a complicated series of gestures to indicate that he should dress as quickly as possible so that they could get down to the pitch. Sirius rolled his eyes, but obliged, pulling on his kit and following James downstairs. Prongs was relentless at practice, shouting orders and blowing on his whistle until everyone's ears hurt, taking them through the same rigorous set of drills for over an hour. By the time he finally released them, everyone was completely knackered, too tired to even complain as they dragged their feet towards the locker rooms. Sirius and James ended up walking back to the Great Hall with Marlene and Yaz, who was wincing and rubbing her shoulders. She had spent the better part of an hour catching the quaffles that were launched at full speed into her arms. "Merlin Potter," Yaz groaned. "You're a bloody fantastic captain. I've got no idea what the team will do without you next year. But I will not miss that whistle of yours." James laughed, pulling the whistle out of his pocket and dangling it in front of her face. "You mean this old thing?" Yaz shuddered like a vampire confronted with garlic. "Get that away from me! God, I never want to see it again after this weekend." "Ugh, can't believe this is going to be our last match ever," Marlene sighed. "Maybe for you," her girlfriend poked her in the ribs. "I've still got another year left." Yeah, lucky you." Marlene shook her head, smiling fondly. Yaz smiled back. "Won't be the same without you lot, though," she said, nudging James with her shoulder. "I'll have to deal with Erickson all by myself now." "I'm sure you'll manage." James grinned at her. It hadn't been announced yet, but Sirius was fairly certain that he and McGonagall were planning to make Yaz the captain next year. She'd be the most experienced member on the team once the 7th year's left, and her no-nonsense attitude would lend itself to wrangling a team full of rowdy Gryffindors. Sirius was pretty sure that Yaz knew it too, though she hadn't said anything outright. She kept dropping hints, as though it were already a done deal. Their usual spot at the table was still empty when they reached the Great Hall, though Peter and Mary arrived for breakfast just a few minutes after they all sat down. "Where's Remus?" Sirius asked. At the same time, James said, "Where's Lily?" The girls began to laugh, though Peter just rolled his eyes. "Went to the library," he grumbled, spooning porridge into a bowl. "More arithmancy revision." "I'm sure they'll be down soon," Mary added, still giggling. "Lily left the room an hour ago, and I doubt Remus will want to miss breakfast." The group settled into their usual chatter, passing coffee pots and sugar bowls across the table. When the post came, an owl swooped down next to the platter of eggs with a letter for Marlene, who patted the bird fondly before sending it away. As she scanned the letter, her face darkened slightly. By the time she put it down, she was chewing on her lip. "Another one from your mum?" Yaz asked, reaching out to take her hand under the table. Marlene nodded. "Did something happen with Danny?" James asked, frowning as he looked down at the plate of food. "No," Marlene sighed. "She's just checking up on me every few days to ask about scheduling for the entrance exams for the Healer Academy. Keep trying to tell her that I've already got my newts to focus on right now, but..." She sighed again, shaking her head. "I didn't know there was a separate exam for Healer Academy," James said, scratching his head. "I thought it would just be based on newts results." "I wish," Marlene muttered. "Newts results are only half of it. You have to sit for a specialised exam if you actually want to apply. You can find an apprenticeship with just newts, as a potion maker or an apothecist, but if you want to be a healer, then it's all about the test scores." "Blimey," James shook his head. "You still want to do it?" Marlene shrugged. "It's the only job I've ever wanted. I've been preparing for the exam for the past 3 years. I've known it was coming. It's a lot to think about on top of newts." Yaz wrapped an arm around her girlfriend's shoulders and squeezed, smiling encouragingly. "You'll do great," she said confidently. "There's no one that would make a better healer than you." Marlene smiled back at her, gratefully, and the rest of their friends chimed in with added encouragement. The talk about Healer Academy entrance exams was cut short by the arrival of Lily and Remus, who both seemed very out of breath and somewhat flustered. Lily was obviously trying to suppress a smile, shooting amused looks at Remus, whose expression was stormy, eyes dark and mouth twisted into a frown. "Stupid, ridiculous, completely unfair," he grumbled to himself as he sat down, and Lily's smile only widened. Sirius glanced back and forth between the both of them, curious. "Something happen?" he asked as the rest of their friends turned to look at the two newcomers. "Oh, something happened, all right," Lily chuckled, shaking her head. Remus scowled, reaching for the eggs. "Bloody Christopher." "What happened with Christopher?" Sirius asked, frowning. Remus was still grumbling, so it was Lily who answered, obviously trying to contain her amusement as she spoke. He jellified Lockhart. He... What? She nodded, grinning from ear to ear. Apparently, Lockhart is the one who confronted him last night. He tried to do it again today, and Sirius used a jelly legs jinx, except he, and I quote, expanded on it. According to Remus, you're responsible for that one, Potter. You taught Chris jelly legs supreme. James turned to Remus with a wild smile on his face. Remus groaned. Anyway, Lily continued, shooting James a disapproving look, which was mitigated somewhat by her helpless grin. The spell went wild. Instead of doing what it usually does, it... She pressed a hand to her mouth, clearly fighting back laughter. The rest of them waited on the edge of their seats as Lily took a deep breath. It turned him to jelly. James blinked. It what? She nodded, giggling. When Remus and I got there, we didn't even know it was a person at first. He was just... She broke off, trying to get her laughter under control. A giant blue jelly! For a moment, James stared at her, and then he threw his head back, laughing uproariously. And pretty soon the rest of their group had joined in. Even Remus was smiling, albeit grudgingly. Sirius wiped tears from his eyes, trying to picture Lockhart transformed into a quivering blue gelatin. He'll be all right, though, I assume, Marlene asked, once everyone had calmed down a bit. Lily nodded. Madame Pomfrey said he'll be in the hospital wing for a few days, but there shouldn't be any permanent damage. Why are you so grumpy then, Moony? Sirius asked, turning to Remus. Lockhart's an insufferable git. Thought you hated him as much as the rest of us. Remus sighed, shaking his head. It's not a spell I'm annoyed about, he muttered. Sirius raised a brow. I had to fetch McGonagall, and she didn't believe that Remus and Chris had just found Gilderoy like that. Lily explained, still a bit giggly. So she punished them anyway. Well, a bit of detention never hurt anyone. She didn't give me detention, Remus scowled. She didn't? She said she thought a different punishment might be more fitting, seeing as Remus only has a few weeks left at Hogwarts anyway, Lily said, with a smug smile playing on the corner of her lips. Oh, what'd she give you then? Peter piped up, peering across the table. Remus looked at Lily, but she shook her head, refusing to explain for him. He sighed again, heavily. She said I gotta commentate the next match. Remus mumbled, barely audible, blurring all his words together. Sorry, what was that? She said I've got to commentate the next match, he snapped, glaring down at his pumpkin juice. Sirius's eyes widened, and across the table, James's face split into a slow grin. When you say match, you don't mean... Remus slumped in his seat. Yes, he told them, deflated. Since Lockhart won't be able to, she's gonna make me take over his job in the upcoming Quidditch match. Sirius just about died. By the time he'd calmed down, he was gasping for breath, tears streaming down his face. Oh, Merlin, he gasped desperately. That's the best thing I've ever heard. He and James spent the rest of the day teasing Remus about his predicament, absolutely thrilled by the idea of Moony, who could barely tell a bludger from a quaffle, trying to muggle his way through explaining an entire Quidditch match. Marlene and Yaz seemed just as amused, and between the four of them, the teasing was relentless, lasting well into the evening. I just won't do it, Remus insisted over and over again. I'll sit there with my mouth shut. There's nothing they can do. Don't be ridiculous, Sirius laughed. You need to sing our praises. It's really just about following the quaffle, James assured him. You can keep an eye on that. You'll be fine. Oi, spare a thought for the beaters, Marlene objected. And the keeper, Yasmin put in. Peter was the only one who didn't seem to be enjoying Remus's predicament, sulking in the corner as the rest of them sat around the fire. Took no stretch of the imagination to figure out why, with his notebook full of observations and details written down after watching hours of practices. He clearly thought that he would be better suited to the task. While Sirius supposed that was probably true, He doubted that having Peter commentate a match would be anywhere near as entertaining as listening to Mooney do it. In the end, though, it all worked out. Remus begged Peter for his help preparing, which seemed to cheer the sullen boy up. And the two of them spent nearly as much time studying for the next match over the next 2 days as they did revising for Newts. Remus even got permission from McGonagall to have Peter sit in the commentator's box with him, in case he needed help. Sirius wasn't sure he'd ever seen Pete work harder on an assignment in his 7 years at Hogwarts. When the day of the match finally came, the stands were a sea of red and green. Sirius paused as they walked onto the field, his heart in his throat, and James clapped him on the back as he strolled by. "All right, Black." He savoured it, the buzzing crowd, the brush of wind, the spark of adrenaline in his veins. Never better. Sirius felt a thrill of ecstatic joy as they took their positions with their brooms, the sort of wild happiness that not even his brother's sour face could touch. He grinned fiercely at Reggie from across the pitch, teeth bared, feeling nothing but desire to win. He'd never expected to play another match at Hogwarts. He'd be damned if he let Slytherin steal his glory from him, from James, from their team. Suddenly, the sound of a throat clearing rang out over the stadium. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to the Hogwarts Quidditch Cup Final, 1978. Sirius had to fight to keep from laughing. The game hadn't even started yet, and Remus was already flustered. James had given him a shot of fire whiskey for his nerves, and Mary had graciously offered half of her joint, but neither of them seemed to be doing much to calm the poor boy down, now that the game was about to begin. Right. So, here we go. The teams are on the pitch. That's Gryffindor in the red, Captain James Potter, and Slytherin in the green, Captain Carenza Smythe. Not a lot to say, really, until they're all up there. Sirius gripped his broom, still grinning, and waited for Hooch to blow her whistle. She was smiling too, and shaking her head slightly. Oh, okay, so the players. Well, obviously, James, he's the chaser. He's pretty good, I'm told. He's the one who's told me. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. James squinted up at the commentator's booth, affronted. Gryffindor keeper, Yasmin Patel. Also very good, I suppose. As far as I know. I'm no expert. Sirius Black and Marlene McKinnon. Beaters. Good beaters. The whole team's really good, let's just say that. Madame Hooch was signalling for them to all mount, and Sirius tried to keep his focus, even as he listened to Remus listing off the Slytherin players. He somehow managed to give them even less detail about them, though he did gleefully announce that the seeker was Reggie Black. Regulus cringed, and Sirius smirked at him tauntingly. "Oh, great. Looks like they're about to start," Remus announced. "Yep, there goes the whistle, and no surprises there. Potter's in possession of the quaffle. Blimey, he's fast, look at him go. And that's a goal. 10-0 to Gryffindor. Nice one, Prongs." James took a victory lap around the pitch, grinning and cheering at the crowd, and throwing a thumbs up towards Remus. Sirius reached out to high-five him as he swept past, limbs buzzing with adrenaline. As the game continued, Sirius was pleasantly surprised to discover that Remus was not entirely incompetent when it came to commentating Quidditch. At least he was able to give a somewhat accurate summary of what was occurring on the pitch in front of him. "Slytherin is now in possession of the quaffle. I think that's Timothy Bloodstrode? Yep, okay. Not as fast as James, is he? Never mind. He's nearly there. Oh, no! Blocked by a bludger there from McKinnon. Well done, Marlene. That one looked like it hurt." The microphone picked up on Professor McGonagall's voice, slightly muffled. "Mr. Lupin, a little less bias, if you please." "Oh, sorry, Professor. Okay. So, Potter's back in possession. He passes to Eriksson. Eriksson's really flying. She's almost... Oh, bugger. Slytherin back in possession." A disgruntled squawk from McGonagall at the swearing. Remus apologised hurriedly. "Sorry. Bloodstrode heading for the goalpost now. Oh, come on. Even I'm faster than that. He shoots and... blocked by Gryffindor keeper Patel. See, I told you she was good. 3/4 of the stands were cheering, overwhelming the booing that came from the green quarter. Like James, Yaz took a victory lap, and Sirius took advantage of the opportunity to fly past the commentator's box. Remus was smiling, microphone set square in front of his freckled face. Sirius grinned back, catching his eye. Ericsson back in possession of the quaffle now. Passes it to Potter. Potter's charging up the pitch. See? Bloodstrode? That's how you bloody fly. Sorry, Professor. Goal! 20-0 to Gryffindor. Sirius had never heard Remus speak so enthusiastically about Quidditch before. He wondered if it was a good thing that McGonagall had never forced Moony to do this earlier. She might have created a monster. Looks like Slytherin Seeker Black might have seen the snitch. Remus spoke quickly, and Sirius whipped his head around to check. Sure enough, Reg was leaning forward over his broom, diving sharply. Yep, he's definitely seen something. Oh, he's speeding up. Bad luck. Blocked by a bludger there from Gryffindor beater Black. Sirius threw a wink toward Remus from across the pitch, although he had no idea if the other boy could actually see it or not. Regulus glared at him furiously, along with the rest of his teammates, but Sirius only smirked at them. Bring it on, then. Things ramped up after that. Nothing strictly outside the rules, but there were definitely a few more elbows thrown, and the beaters on both sides started swinging with more force. Ericsson has the quaffle again. She's going back to pass to Potter? No? Looks like she's going to fly, try for a goal for herself. Come on, Ericsson. Oh, flippin' hell. That was uncalled for. Ericsson hit by a bludger from Avery. Slytherin, and Not now has possession. Ericsson looks dazed. Is she? No, that's a thumbs up. Good on you, girl. Another brief pause for an indistinct reprimand from McGonagall, and Remus was back at it again. Right. So, Not has the quaffle. He shoots. 10 points to Slytherin, but it's still Gryffindor's game. Potter has the quaffle. He's flying. He's there. Shit, watch out, James! Caranza Smythe was flying at breakneck speed directly towards James, clearly intending to knock him bodily off course. Before she could reach him, though, Marlene swooped in, crashing into the Slytherin captain instead. Bloody hell! Remus shouted into the microphone. Nicely done, McKinnon. That girl is brutal. Oh, come on, Hooch. That's got to be a penalty to Gryffindor. Get off your arse and referee the sodding match. Uh-oh. Looks like Reggie Black has his eye on the snitch again. Sirius couldn't help but laugh, spinning mid-air to see where his brother was on the pitch. Up in the stands, McGonagall shouted at Remus again, threatening to take his microphone away. When it became apparent that Remus would have no issue with that argument, she relented and let the commentary continue. So we're now... what is it? Oh, right. 60-20 to Gryffindor. Just goes to show that cheating doesn't always pay off. Hope you're listening, Black. I mean the younger Black, obviously. Sirius was worried that if he laughed any harder, he was in real danger of falling off his broom completely. Across the pitch, Regulus and the Gryffindor Seeker were diving headfirst towards the snitch, speeding up sharply and headed straight towards each other. Buggerin' Christ, that was close, Remus shouted, as the snitch darted out of reach and both Seekers careened into the stands, somehow managing to stay on their brooms as they tried to pull out of their dives. At the exact same moment, Bloodstrode managed to pitch the quaffle through one of the goalposts, missing Yasmin's outstretched fingers by centimetres. They what? Oh, shit. Sorry, folks. Slytherin scored again. Must have missed that one. Half the crowd was laughing hysterically, as the other half booed. Though, for perhaps the first time ever in Hogwarts history, the booing was not aimed at the game, but at the commentator. Remus did not seem perturbed in the slightest. Won't happen again, he chirped. Right. Potter, back in pursuit of the quaffle. Dodges a bludger from Avery there. Jesus, this game is violent. Black, the good one, catches up with the bludger and aims it at... Yes! Regulus Black once again has to dodge. Luckily, he's so used to weaseling his way out of trouble, eh? Carenza had started following Regulus, trying to protect him, as though she knew that the only hope for Slytherin was winning the snitch early on. Sirius exchanged a look with Marlene, who grinned at him. They both fired bludgers straight at the Slytherin captain, forcing her to abandon her bodyguard position at Reggie's side. Fuck me! Remus yelled, watching her swoop out of the way. Completely mental! I seriously have no idea why anyone plays this. But fair play. It's distracted Regulus enough to... Wait, yes? Yes! Bloody hell, yes! That's Gryffindor with the snitch! We bloody won! Oh my god! Thank fuck for that. That's enough! McGonagall's shrill voice echoed through the stands as she yanked the microphone away, cutting Remus off. But anything else she might have said was drowned out by the roar of the crowd, who flooded out onto the field like a tidal wave of red and gold. Sirius landed so quickly that he stumbled, but before he could regain his balance, James was there, knocking him sideways in a furious bear hug. Sirius laughed, elated, and hugged him back, feeling so alive that his magic buzzed beneath his skin. When they broke apart, James was glowing, glasses askew, hair a snarled mess around his face. He grinned so broadly that he looked as if his face might split in two, shouting to be heard over the cheers of the crowd. "We did it! Sirius, we did it!" Sirius laughed and pulled him in for another hug, half wishing that there was a way to make this moment last forever.